Olá, tudo bem? Bem-vindo ao meu programa. Hoje eu vou mostrar uma entrevista no The Real News, mas antes disso eu quero falar um pouco sobre os resultados da eleição no estado do Carolina do Sul ontem, em que Bernie Sanders ficou num distante segundo lugar depois do Joe Biden, que ganhou quase 50% do voto. Esse resultado colocou algumas pessoas que estão torcendo para Bernie Sanders em pânico, mas foi todo previsto nas pesquisas, porque Carolina do Sul tem algumas peculiaridades demográficas que favoreceu Biden. Primeiro, eu tenho um amigo do Carolina do Sul e a gente sempre toma cerveja junto e discute político. Ele preveniu que Trump iria ganhar a eleição em 2016. Eu respeito a opinião dele. Ele é afro-americano e ele fala que nos Carolinas, Norte e Sul, a comunidade afro-americana gosta muito do Obama e Clinton, pois ambos presidentes democratas fez muito para atrair indústria àqueles dois estados. O fato, porém, é que essa mudança de indústria para os Carolinas prejudicou os estados no centro-oeste, como Illinois, de onde eu venho, porque no centro-oeste os sindicatos são mais fortes. Os Carolinas eram estados de sindicato fraco, onde eles podiam colocar salários mais baixos do que os estados no centro-oeste. Porém, como o meu amigo falou, esse fez muita diferença na economia de ambos os estados, que não tinha basicamente nada, só agricultura, antes dos presidentes do Clinton e Obama. Por causa disso que o Biden, que foi o vice do Obama, ainda é muito querido no estado do Carolina do Sul. Outro fator é que Carolina do Sul tem um amplo eleitorado afro-americano. E os afro-americanos tradicionalmente apoiam os candidatos democratas mais centristas. As pesquisas mostram, por exemplo, que nacionalmente Biden tem o maior apoio pela comunidade afro-americana, seguido pelo Sanders. Sanders, atualmente, tem apoio da maioria do eleitorado latino e o segundo maior nível de apoio do eleitorado negro. Todas as pesquisas mostraram antes das eleições de ontem que Biden iria levar pela uma ampla margem. E isso é de fato o que aconteceu. Só que Bernie ainda conseguiu 8 delegados, ele ainda fica na liderança da corrida eleitoral do Partido Democrata. Isso é importante, porque na terça-feira vai ter 15 estados que vai ter eleições para os primários democratas. E esse é chamado Super Tuesday, ou Super Terça-feira. E a primeira prova de fogo dos candidatos, pois junto esses 15 estados representam mais de 30% do eleitorado dos Estados Unidos. Quem leva no terça-feira tem uma grande chance de levar todo. E essa terça-feira alguns estados poderosos vão entrar na corrida. Por exemplo, Califórnia, que tem 415 delegados, ou seja, mais de 4 vezes o número de delegados que já foram colocados nas primeiras 4 eleições estaduais. As pesquisas todas mostram que Sanders vai sair terça-feira como o vencedor. Ele está previsto de vencer Califórnia, Colorado e outros estados importantes. O Biden está previsto de vencer em Alabama e está perto em alguns estados do sul que tem grande número de eleitores negros. Amy Klobuchar, que não tem chance nenhuma de levar essa eleição, ela está prevista de vencer no estado dela, Minnesota, mas o grande número, a maioria dos estados vai ser levado pelo Sanders. Essa que as pesquisas estão dizendo. E depois do fiasco, depois da palhaçada das pesquisas em 2016, que quase todo preveniu uma vitória do Hillary Clinton, as agências de pesquisa estão sendo muito mais cuidadosas para evitar mais uma vergonha. Então, até agora, as pesquisas vêm razoavelmente boa. Ou seja, a vitória do Biden no Carolina do Sul não dá razão nenhuma para entrar em pânico os apoiadores do Bernie Sanders. E como eu apoio o Bernie Sanders, eu não estou entrando em pânico, eu sabia que ele iria perder. Então, agora eu vou falar um pouco sobre a reportagem do Real News que eu vou mostrar hoje. Não está entrando na mídia hegemônica brasileira. Não está entrando no Globo. Eu não vi essa história em nenhum veículo da mídia hegemônico. Mas o Canadá segue quase paralisado faz semanas por causa de manifestações indígenas contra um gasoduto que está planejado de passar por dentro do Terça indígena no estado, no província do British Columbia, Colômbia Britânica, que é a parte mais oeste de Canadá. Em solidariedade com o tribo lá, os tribos indígenas do país inteiro pegam as ruas e começam a fechar as linhas de trem e algumas estradas. E muitas pessoas que não são indígenas estão manifestando na rua em solidariedade com eles. Então, passou mais de 2 semanas com todo o transporte de trem bloqueado entre as 2 cidades principais do Canadá, Toronto e Montreal. E no Canadá, trem é uma forma de transporte super importante, né? Como se fosse na Europa, né? Não é como o Brasil, onde quase não tem trem de passageiro. Esse pedaço do Real News, que eu vou colocar no programa de hoje, é uma entrevista com uma ativista, advogada e professora universitário indígena chamado Pam Palmeter, em que ela fala sobre por que está acontecendo, o que está acontecendo e quais são os próximos passos. Eu acho que numa clima de ódio e genocídio contra indígenas no Brasil, é relevante mostrar como uma grande porcentagem da população da nação está tomando as ruas em solidariedade com os povos indígenas em Canadá. Então, espero que vocês gostem do programa e boa tarde para todos e todas de vocês.
This is Dimitri Lascaris reporting for the Real News Network from Montreal, Canada. As the Real News reported last week, blockades of critical infrastructure have been erected across Canada in solidarity with land defenders on Wet'suwet'en territory. Those land defenders have been peacefully resisting the construction of a fracked gas pipeline on their lands situated in northern British Columbia. For days, federal and provincial law enforcement reacted to these solidarity blockades with relative restraint, but all of that changed on Friday, February 21st, when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau demanded that the blockades be dismantled. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say on that day.
Canadians have been patient. Our government has been patient. But it has been 2 weeks, and the barricades need to come down now.
This morning, February 24th, Ontario Provincial Police forcibly arrested Indigenous land defenders in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory, which lies between Toronto and Montreal. There, Indigenous land defenders had set up rail blockade, which, among other things, had brought passenger rail traffic between Canada's 2 largest cities to a standstill for weeks. Now here to discuss these latest developments with us is Pam Palmeter. Pam is a Mi'kmaq lawyer and a member of the Eel River Bar First Nation. She currently holds the chair in Indigenous governance at Ryerson University. She's also a frequent media commentator, author, and former spokesperson and educator for the Idle No More movement. Thank you so much for joining us again, Pam.
Thanks for covering this.
Pam, I would like to start by getting your overall reaction to the developments of the past few days. Trudeau claimed in his press conference last Friday that his government had been patient. He claimed to have engaged in dialogue with Indigenous land defenders. He claimed that his government had, quote, come to the table, but that the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en had failed to come to the table. What do you make of all of these claims by the Prime Minister?
Well, this was a lot of propaganda for the benefit of Canadians, knowing full well what was going to happen. The Wet'suwet'en peoples and the hereditary leaders and clan members have been asking for a nation-to-nation meeting with Canada, the Prime Minister, and the BC Premier John Horgan since January. So they have been asking for a real nation-to-nation discussion, but they had said they can't have this discussion at gunpoint. So the RCMP had to leave their territories so that they could engage in a way where there's no violence or intimidation. And Canada refused to meet those demands. While the RCMP said that they were going to leave the territory, they never did. We saw all the pictures and videos. So you have a situation where the Prime Minister sends a very strong message to the police forces in this country. These blockades must come down. when in effect, governments are supposed to have no role in how different police agencies conduct their business. And up until that point, like you said in your introduction, the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, had shown some degree of restraint. And so, that message comes out, and it's no shocker then that they move in to arrest the Mohawks at Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. But at the same time, the RCMP were also rolling into Wet'suwet'en territory. And both of those are being reported at the same time. So this is really, really inappropriate. It's undue influence on the police, and it's something that should never have happened. And you know what else? It sounds eerily familiar to what happened, during the Ipperwash crisis. And if you'll recall, an OPP officer shot and killed an unarmed land defender. And so the OPP, of course, should never have done what they did. But it's this undue influence by political leaders saying, get the Indians out of the park, remove the blockades, enforce the rule of law, but no rule of law for Indigenous peoples.
So, yes, it seems rather fortuitous that the police moved in so shortly after the Prime Minister declared that the blockades must come down. Hard to believe that the two events are unrelated. But I want to talk to you about another aspect of the narrative, Pam, that is being promulgated by the mainstream media, and particularly the right-leaning politicians in this country. Some of them have derided the notion that the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en speak for the Wet'suwet'en people. Some have implied that there's something vaguely anti-democratic about giving precedence to the will of hereditary decision makers. I've even seen some people, including persons who would describe themselves as progressive, describe the hereditary chiefs as royalty, as though they are not unlike European monarchies. Could you talk to us about why in Indigenous culture the voices of hereditary chiefs are authoritative, and whether in fact they bear any resemblance at all to traditional European monarchies?
Right. So I don't think they bear any resemblance to monarchies, first of all. But I mean, that's a really good comparison. Like, if you're going to complain about something, you need to look at your own systems. But for Indigenous nations across the country, like the traditional Indigenous nations, there's all different kinds of traditional governing systems. Some have hereditary systems. Others have systems of matriarchs. Others have systems where the leaders are identified at birth, and there's a whole bunch of different traditional systems. So we're not all the same, but in the hereditary system, it's not like someone is just anointed and then they're there for life. If they don't do the will of the people, if they don't follow their traditional laws, if they're not looking out for the entire nation, they can be removed. And in fact, in the Wet'suwet'en Nation, hereditary leaders have been removed for not acting accordingly. So there's a whole bunch of culture and traditions and laws and rules and regulations around it. It's not at all like the monarchy, and it's about traditional laws and customs. So there's something far more democratic about traditional laws that work on the basis of consensus and trying to get everybody on board versus a 51% rule. I mean, that's not even a real majority in any sense of the word. And then when you take into account so few people vote, you're really talking about a fraction. Where traditional governments, really, it's about everyone getting a voice, everybody working towards consensus. And if you can't get 100% consensus, then working to accommodate concerns in a fair way. And that takes time. And so democracy skips all that for convenience. I think these traditional forms of governance are far more effective and far more representative of the people. And if you think about democracies in general, it's supposed to be about governance by the people, for the people. And traditional governments do that far better than, the electoral system.
Now, on February 19th, Pam, 2 days before Trudeau's tough guy press conference on Friday, the polling firm Ipsos Reid issued a poll showing that 61% of Canadians say they disagree that the protesters are conducting justified and legitimate protests, while 39% take the opposite view, agreeing that the protests are both legitimate and justified. And Ipsos Reid noted that in 2013, a poll of Canadians reacting to Indigenous blockades taking place at that time showed that 31% thought the blockades were justified compared to 69% who didn't. So support appears to have risen significantly in the past 7 years. Moreover, the corporate community hasn't shied away from painting the blockades as the work of extremists, but when nearly 40% of Canadians appear to agree with what they're doing, can they fairly be characterized as extremists? And what do you make of these polling numbers overall?
Well, I mean, polls are problematic because it tends to be those with some degree of affluence who are polled. So people who have access to cell phones and computers. So you think about all of the remote territories who won't be accessed. You think of all of the people who are homeless or precariously housed, people in prisons, like all of the most impoverished tend not to be the ones that are polled. So, it's like a small group of people that are constantly polling themselves. So I always take that with a grain of salt. And second of all, human rights are they're not a popularity contest. And if they were, women wouldn't be in politics right now. If it had been left to waiting for a majority of men to agree that women should have rights, we would still be fighting it. And that's what human rights are. It's meant to be a pushback against the majority who are oppressing and anti-human rights. And it's the same thing with Native rights, except at a much higher level. And no, of course, the people involved in this are not extremists. I'm involved. I'm a lawyer. I have 4 university degrees. There are academics, there are lawyers, there are doctors, there are massive numbers of unions, teachers groups standing on these protests. There's Canadians, there's kids that are doing this. I mean, even some of the rail workers were saying that they were offering support. So this is not about extremism, but these comments show something very clearly, that they are worried. It's a lot easier when it's just a few Native people because it's easier to vilify people and cut out their voices in the mainstream media. But when you're talking about thousands and thousands of Canadians, protesting in Toronto, protesting at the Parliament today, doing rolling barricades, shutting down ports and legislatures, they're quite worried about the fact that Canadians and continue to grow in support of us, and well, they should. This is about human rights. Native rights are human rights, and they've been denied for far too long. So this kind of extremist language is really just showing their fear around it.
And finally, Pam, I'm going to ask you to prognosticate again, which is always a dicey proposition. But based on what you have seen from the public today, for example, there was a protest in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en in the nation's capital. I'm sure there have been numerous others around the country. Where do you expect things to go from here? Are the blockades over, or do you envision an escalation in the resistance?
I don't think the solidarity actions are over at all, because when you think about it, the Mohawks from Tyendinaga territory, they were doing their actions in solidarity very peacefully, not even on the rail, but a fire on the side of the rail. So not technically blocking anything. And they get arrested. So because theirs was done in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en, now you have all of these solidarity actions in solidarity with the Mohawks from Tyendinaga territory. And, there's one thing that is really, really important here. Of course, there's going to be more solidarity actions. There's going to be more actions all across the country, and not just by Indigenous peoples, by Canadians. I mean, there's letters being issued by senators and MPs and lawyers today saying that what Canada's doing wrong. But I think it's important for the viewers to note that the United Nations has already called on Canada to stand down, stop violence against Indigenous peoples, remove the police officers and their weapons, and work towards consent on these projects and not move ahead with them without consent. So everything has changed as far as I'm concerned. Canada reached a tipping point. They promised reconciliation. They brought their, law enforcement out with their weapons, and now we're in a scenario where reconciliation looks dead. What gives me hope is that Canadians are trying to keep it alive. And I think if there's going to be any success here, it's going to be the push of Canadians on politicians who cannot get their minds out of the colonial mindset.
Well, we've been speaking again to Indigenous lawyer, activist, and scholar Pam Palmater about the most recent maneuvers of the Trudeau government in response to solidarity blockades. Thank you so much for joining us again today, Pam.
Thank you for having me.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris reporting for the Real News Network.
As we launch this campaign for president, you deserve to know where I came from, because family history obviously heavily influences the values that we develop as adults. I was born literally a few miles away from here on East 26th Street in Kings Highway. My family and I lived in a 3.5-room rent-controlled apartment. My father was a paint salesman who worked hard his entire life but never made much money. My mother raised my brother and me. I learned a great deal about immigration as a child because my father came from Poland at the age of 17 without a nickel in his pocket, without knowing one word of English. He came to the United States to escape the crushing poverty that existed in his community and to escape widespread anti-Semitism. And it was a good thing that he came to this country, because virtually his entire family was wiped out by Hitler and Nazi barbarism. I am not going to tell you that I grew up in a home of desperate poverty. That would not be true. But what I will tell you is that coming from a lower middle-class family, I will never forget about how money, or really lack of money, was always a point of stress in our family. My mother's dream was that someday our family would move out of that rent-controlled apartment to a home of our own. That dream was never fulfilled. She died young while we still lived in that rent-controlled apartment. My experience as a child living in a family that struggled economically powerfully influenced my life and my values. I know where I came from. And that is something I will never forget. Unlike Donald Trump, who shut down the government and left 800,000 federal employees without income to pay their bills, I know what it's like to be in a family that lives paycheck to paycheck. I did not have a father who gave me millions of dollars to build luxury skyscrapers, casinos, and country clubs. I did not come from a family that gave me a $200,000 allowance every year beginning at the age of 3. As I recall, my allowance was 25 cents a week. I had something more valuable. I had the role model of a father who had unbelievable courage in journeying across an ocean with no money in his pocket to start a new and better life. I did not come from a family of privilege that prepared me to entertain people on television by telling workers, "You're fired." I came from a family who knew all too well the frightening power employers can have over everyday workers. I did not come from a family that could afford to send my brother and me to an elite boarding school. In fact, I was educated proudly in high-quality public schools here in Brooklyn and began my higher education right here on this campus. This is what I believe from the bottom of my heart. If we stand together, believing in justice and human dignity, believing in love and compassion, if we stand together, brothers and sisters, the future of this country is extraordinary, and there is nothing we will not be able to accomplish. Thank you all very much.
Back there, let's take those 3 questions.
Okay. Senator Sanders, in the past couple of years, we have seen the rise of these far-right authoritarian leaders and the effect they have had on the stability of our world, such as in Brazil, where a corrupt investigation has falsely imprisoned their popular and former president, Lula da Silva. How will the Sanders administration address these leaders and their negative impact on our world? Lula Livre.
Well, as somebody who has written to Brazilian authorities to get Lula out of jail, it's an issue that I feel very strongly about. And that is, the United States needs to conduct a foreign policy based on democracy and human rights, the very opposite of what Trump is doing now as he supports authoritarian governments in Brazil and all over the country.